Hello everyone, welcome to our Egyptian online seminar group. First, keep your microphones off. Then, if you have any questions, you can ask our speaker during his presentation or after his presentation. I have great pleasure of welcoming Professor Jessen Hobson. Jessen Hobson is a professor of accounting and the director of the University of Illinois-Deloitte Foundation's Center for Business Analytics, the co-director of the Gies Behavioral Research Lab, and the Pricewaterhouse faculty fellow at the University of Illinois. He received his PhD from the University of Texas at Houston. His research examines how and why managers over-report their performance. He published his his research, he has been published into ranking journals in accounting, including the Accounting Review and the Journal of Accounting Research. Now we will start our seminar with Professor Jessen Hobson.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. And you've had such a great series here, and I'm honored to be a part of it and looking forward to presenting. And so just appreciate your efforts in organizing this thing. That's what a great idea it is, and what a great series it's been. Thank you. Let's see, I'm going to go ahead and project here, and Sebastian taught me how to do it this way, so hopefully you can see the slides all right and it looks good. I do want to acknowledge my co-author who's here, Sebastian Sternkorb, who is fantastic and really deserves the vast majority of the credit for this project. It's one that we've really enjoyed working on, and we really appreciate your comments. We were just mentioning before that we're getting close to submitting this, and would greatly appreciate anything you have to say. As Mohammed said, jump in whenever you'd like, and feel free to raise your hand or just open up your mic and ask questions if you'd like. Also, if you want to put things in the chat, go ahead and do that, of course. And I think probably Sebastian will mostly be able to take care of that, but we'll respond to those questions to the best we can. And really do look forward to your comments. So the paper is called Managing Earnings to Appear Truthful: The Effect of Public Scrutiny on Exactly Meeting an Earnings Threshold. I guess earnings isn't the title, but earnings, I'll add that there. And it's here's the research question. So let me go ahead and read this to you. So given increased skepticism of exactly meeting earnings benchmarks, does higher public scrutiny of managers and sensitivity to investors' assessments cause managers to misreport when meeting earnings benchmarks? So there's three kind of key parts to this that I'm going to explain and kind of try and motivate here at the outset. First is this piece of increased skepticism. So I'll talk about that. Next is the higher public scrutiny. So we look at, that's one of our manipulated variables, as we'll talk about in detail. And then sensitivity to investors' assessments, and we measure that. So those second two are our two variables. The first one, this increased skepticism, is something that we assume based on the archival research. And so let me just kind of set the stage, kind of set the setting here. So we're looking at managers reporting their earnings, right? So, quarterly firms, public firms in the US at least, and broadly elsewhere as well, generate earnings and generate a report that they submit here in the US to the SEC, to the regulator. And those earnings, of course, are going to be examined by investors relative to a benchmark. And there's, of course, many different benchmarks that can exist. It might be the management's own forecasts, and it might be analysts' expectations. And I'll probably just use that setting as the one that I'll talk about the most. Now, our experiment is done in an abstract way. And so we intend it to apply to many different types of benchmarks. But I'll talk about analyst expectations. So we have, sell-side analysts who form expectations and predictions about what quarterly earnings are going to be for a particular public company. And there's broadly three things that can happen here, as you see on the slide. So management can beat those expectations, in this case, analyst expectations. And if they do, that's great. Everyone's happy, the company does well, investors are happy. In general, that's a very positive thing. So there's your smiley face for B. The second thing that can happen is that the earnings that management reports misses the expectations of analysts. Okay, so earnings miss expectations. And long literature has shown that this is a negative, obviously, for the company, and it's seen negatively in the stock market. The price will often decline. The company's stock price will often decline after revealing that they've missed analyst expectations. So management's hurt, the company's hurt, and it's all overall negative. Because that's the case, we have pretty extensive analytical literature now, archival rather, literature, sorry, in accounting that says that managers have a tendency to manage their earnings to not miss by a small amount. So if they're missing by a small amount, they'll manage their earnings to meet expectations or slightly beat the expectations of analysts. So this is well known, and it's been around for quite a while. What we're looking at is a somewhat recent development, but increased, because this has happened, there's increased skepticism of exactly meeting expectations or slightly beating. And so because investors have seen this behavior happen and have somewhat baked in this baked-in expectation that managers who miss are going to misreport and overreport to meet, there's now a skepticism of this middle rectangle of meeting earnings exactly. And so the paper cites the several different archival findings of this. One that we've added just recently is from Fellig et al. And they say, I'm just going to kind of read this quote for you. So they say the following: after 2001, investors' attitudes to perceived earnings management has changed. Firms collectively incur a cost for playing this numbers game around earnings thresholds. Investors view small positive, and we would add exactly meeting. So investors view small positive and meeting earnings as implicit evidence of earnings management, and punish all firms that meet or just beat earnings thresholds, regardless of whether earnings management actually took place. So this is a foundation that we're building on. So we're assuming this based on, again, the archival literature. We're assuming that there's increased skepticism about exactly meeting expectations. With that assumed, then what we're interested in is, and what we predict is that managers who care about how others think about them are going to misreport when their earnings actually meet expectations. That is, when true earnings meet expectations, they will lie so as not to be seen as a liar. Does that make sense? So they're meeting expectations exactly. True earnings meets expectations, but they assume and understand the skepticism that exists for meeting, and they expect that they'll be seen as misreporting, and so they misreport more to be seen as not being a misreporter, lie to be seen as not a liar. So that's kind of our, so again, this is our setting. We have the manager here on the left who's trying to report honestly, who wants to be, who doesn't want to be misbelieved by others. And we have the skeptical investors where when the manager's earnings exactly meet, he will or she will misreport to be seen as not misreporting. So that's
Can I
our
ask a clarifying question?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, is that Tim?
Hi,
Go
this
ahead.
is Timothy. Hi, nice to meet you. So we're talking about this reporting game where you have basically a sender of information and a receiver of information. And I understand the tensions that you're talking about. What I don't understand is, where does this increase over time skepticism come from? Is there something fundamentally changed about the game, the measurement system, the analyst's ability to get some kind of signal? I hear what you're saying, but I can't imagine what that model looks like. Do you have any insight?
So, Timothy, we don't model that. Again, this is an assumption that we make based on the archival literature. And so the way I understand it from the archival literature, the skepticism comes from the investors themselves. So you have in the past, significant punishment or negative views of those that miss expectations, and then a well-established literature and expectation by investors over time, over the recent past couple decades, that those that miss are going to then misreport to meet or to slightly beat. Then the investors, because of this understanding they have of this earnings management, they're going to be skeptical of just meeting. So we don't model this. It's not in the model. We assume it.
I understand the tensions of the game, and in many ways it just sounds like this is a rational actor, right? If I say I just met, I'll be pooled together with all those people who lost, and I'll be seen as negative. So if I have any slack in what I'm able to report, then I should report higher to separate myself. I'm just wondering, like, what over time caused managers to play more strategic versus I guess just being an honest guy before and being an unhonest guy before.
So again, your question is, maybe I'm not understanding the question. So why do managers pick up on this?
So why if I'm meeting now? Yeah, so if investors have always seen meeting as possibly someone who's beaten but managed books, so they're like, for lack of a better phrase, a bad type. What changed over time so managers are now doing something to separate themselves?
So no, we're contending that the investors have recently had this skepticism of just meeting. So that's what we're saying has changed. So the Kong et al. Looks at earnings response coefficients and show that in the past the skepticism wasn't there. So this is back several back in the 90s, that skepticism wasn't there. As we come now to the modern era, that skepticism has increased. So what we're looking at is actually an irrational response by managers to this. The way we model it and their incentives, and I guess I'm responding there to your question, then something you didn't explicitly ask, but implied, that then they have we model their incentives that they should report truthfully if they meet expectations. I'll show the game in a minute. But instead, we're unveiling a new incentive of trying to appear truthful, of trying to not appear to be misreporting as the incentive, not actually financial incentives to misreport. So we're examining this new incentive.
Okay,
non-financial incentive.
Yeah, we'll get to the game, and then maybe it'll become clear to me. It sounds right now like somehow someone's acting off equilibrium, so someone else acts off equilibrium, and then they either merge to an equilibrium or they depart from one. That's what I'm not understanding.
Right. So it's only going to be the manager who's departing from equilibrium. Again, we're setting up the investors acting in their best interest. And we'll show the Nash Equilibrium in a minute.
Thanks for being patient.
I'll probably pause to get there. What's that?
Thanks for being patient. It's early in the morning in California, so it was just not clicking so far.
Anytime. No, I appreciate that. Yeah, and we'll get there. And if we take too long to get there, just you can holler again, and I'll get there quicker. But let me address Devin's question, and then I'll try and motivate this a bit more, and we'll get there soon.
Yeah, and this may be answered when you get to the game as well. But my question is of the benchmark. So managers have two options here, right? They can misreport, as you mentioned, or they can try to manage the benchmark itself, right? Yeah. And so I'm wondering if that was taken into account, because if I want to be truthful and I can manage that down, then I can beat. So there's kind of two levers, and I'm just kind of wondering, are you only looking at one, or is there interplay between the two?
We're only looking at the one. We're only looking at manager reporting in there, either reporting truthfully or misreporting. So we're assuming that, that could go into the kind of this baseline assumption that we make, that investors know that managers have a couple levers, that one of those levers is managing down analyst expectations, such that, gosh, if they're just meeting, they're probably lying, and they're, because they can manage that down anyway. So if they're just meeting, we're skeptical of that for a couple of reasons. One of them could be the fact that they can, they can manage down analyst expectations. So
okay, great.
We don't look at that lever, and we don't, what we look at is managers over-reporting. Yeah, certainly that's the case though. Thanks. So public scrutiny. So we manipulate public scrutiny, and we expect that increased scrutiny will exacerbate this effect. So exacerbate the effect of managers who exactly meet earnings misreporting to appear to not be misreporting. And we think this is an interesting variable in and of itself, as scrutiny of managers continues to increase. So we see regulators who increasingly scrutinize managers. We see, professional investors, big investors, hedge funds, increasingly scrutinize managers. But now we've added to that, and that's been there. Now we add to that mix the ability of even regular investors to scrutinize managers via social media, and the ability to interact with management and to scrutinize. So we think the public scrutiny of management is increasing, and when we expect that this will exacerbate the effect that we're looking at. Secondly, we measure how concerned managers are about how others see them, whether that concerns them or not. We measure that through the Dark Triad, as I'll talk about in a minute. And we think this is an interesting thing to look at because, again, we expect this to exacerbate the effect. If managers care about how others view them, about how they're viewed by investors, for example, then again, this effect is more likely to be present. And this, again, we think is interesting because it brings what is traditionally a nice control, that is a control over earnings management. That is a manager who cares about being viewed as being honest. That should naturally limit earnings management, right? Because they don't want to be seen as lying. Whereas in our setting, it's exactly the opposite. So because they care about not being seen as dishonest, if their earnings exactly meet expectations, given the skepticism about that, they're more likely then, instead of less likely, they're more likely to misreport. So this natural control actually exacerbates our problem, the issue. So just to recap then, here's a research question. And again, we're going to examine and manipulate public scrutiny. And we think this is an interesting effect, and it's increasingly an issue given social media and other increased scrutiny of managers. We also look at conscientiousness, or how much managers care about how others view them, and we measure that via the Dark Triad. So that's our research question. Just to summarize the results, we get results as we would expect and as we predict. So managers do lie to appear truthful when they meet earnings expectations exactly. Contrary to their incentives, as we'll show in a second. This is especially the case when scrutiny is high, and especially the case when Dark Triad is low. So those are our findings. We'll talk about our hypotheses a bit, and then we'll get to that game. So again, we see an increase in public scrutiny of managers. This is the top, high-tech CEOs and chairmen. This is when they were brought recently before Congress. And they're constantly these individuals. Their Wall Street Journal just had a big article on Facebook and criticizing Zuckerberg for some of the choices he's made. So we think that scrutiny is, if anything, increasing and coming from more angles. And so public scrutiny, we define this as persistent attention to a leader, performance monitoring, frequent interruptions, and relentless questions. We expect then that managers want to be seen in a positive light, that they care about how others perceive them. They certainly care about the impression that they make, and that this concern can lead to misrepresentation. That is, if they don't want to be seen as deceptive. And this is exacerbated by increased scrutiny. So our first hypothesis, given this increased skepticism about meeting a benchmark exactly, we hypothesize in H1 that managers' propensity to misreport earnings increases with public scrutiny when meeting a benchmark exactly, but less so when not meeting that expectation. So again, the whole action is when earnings have been met exactly. We expect this two-way interaction. All right, second, we look at, second, we examine, again, whether managers care about what others think about them. We expect that this will exacerbate that effect. So in a sense, a three-way interaction. The public scrutiny is going to increase the extent that managers who exactly meet will misreport. And that then the more they care about that, the more they're likely to misreport given that public scrutiny. So the Dark Triad is a triad measure of psychopathy, Machiavellianism, and narcissism. The common core here is a disregard for others. Okay, so the second bullet point, characterized by social aversiveness, callousness, and lack of empathy. So again, a disregard for what others think. Thus, high dark triad managers are better able to resist market scrutiny when meeting exactly due to lower interpersonal awareness or concern. And this is consistent with other research that we've seen. I've got an audit paper where we look at auditors and their ability to resist managers' influence on them. And we find that higher dark triad managers are in that setting better able to resist managers' influence on trying to manipulate them. So we use that same effect. In our case, it's kind of the opposite. We're concerned that low dark triad auditors who care about how others feel about them will be more likely to misreport. So H2 managers, high propensity to misreport when public scrutiny increases and true earnings meet a benchmark, as opposed to not meeting. It is more pronounced for non-dark triad than dark triad managers.
Just a quick comment. Sorry to monopolize.
Go ahead.
It was my impression that Machiavellians are very much aware of what other people think, and the fact that they can't have empathy for other people makes them just hyper aware of how they're perceived and so on. I wonder if you ran some kind of metric to see how much of that comes from Machiavellianism, if it might be actually weaker, if it's coming from narcissism or I'll never pronounce it right, so psychopathy rather than Machiavellianism. I had presented a paper and was beat up by the UCLA anthropology group for that interpretation too, that Machiavellians aren't aware of other people. They claim there's evidence ample of just the opposite. They're hyper aware because they can't have empathy, and people get beat up for not having empathy with others. They learn how to read other people and mimic genuine emotion to a greater extent. This is why they're actors and politicians.
Yeah. So and narcissists as well care about how others feel about them. You know, they want to win and succeed. The joint core. So you're totally right, of course. And we don't look at those separately, although Sebastian can help me remember what we've done. We've looked at it, you know, but we purposely look at the joint core of these, and because we expect that then leads to the idea that they don't that they'll do what they want regardless of what others think about them. So this joint core of not caring if others view them in a negative light is what we're going for. Sebastian, do you remember then looking at Machiavellianism alone?
Yeah, we didn't find any effect looking at Machiavellianism alone or any of the other two. So it's really driven by the dark triad.
So what we are arguing is the combined core of these, and I'd refer you to that paper. It's my co-authors. So I guess I'm the first author. So Hobson, Stern, and Zimbelman and Carr, where we make a similar argument about the joint core of these, making people resilient to what others think about them. So you're right. And so Timothy, not that they're not aware of it, but again, that they're going to do what they want to do. And then there was a comment in chat, is relationship between honesty and the dark triad. So that I don't think we don't look at honesty directly in the study. And that is something that is interesting that we haven't modeled, so that's not something we can address.
No, I actually had a question regarding a couple of things.
Sure,
One,
go ahead.
Is there a differential cost in managing earnings in general versus managing earnings in this scenario? That's question one. And question two is that, for a manager who is high on the dark triad, part, I would assume that the person would manage more because, not meeting or meeting by a small margin would affect their, narcissism, because they might be seen as incompetent and they do not want to be seen as incompetent if you're a narcissist, right? So it's kind of a bit, confusing as to why would they not be dishonest when, there is a negative relationship. I just checked and there's a negative relationship between honesty and dark triad managers. So that's kind of something that I thought, it would be interesting to look at.
Oh yeah. So in that sense, yeah, certainly we have plenty of research that talks about those being high in Dark Triad not being concerned about being truthful, right? I mean, psychopaths don't care about being honest. So yeah, certainly that's true. Thanks for clarifying that for me. Yeah. So what we're looking at here, what ends up happening, what we predict is a non-pecuniary incentive when managers meet expectations to misreport. So their financial incentive, as we'll see in a bit here, I know we need to get to it in a second, we'll see that their incentive is to, if true earnings meet expectations, they should report truthfully. That's their financial incentive. And what we expect then is for high Dark Triad managers to follow their incentive, because this non-pecuniary, this non-monetary incentive of trying to appear honest, they don't care, right? I'm going to follow my financial incentives, and they do. And that's what we find. Whereas, again, those that are low in Dark Triad that care more about how others might be perceiving them, disregard their financial incentive and misreport to their financial detriment.
So
just
my question,
to clarify.
Yeah, no. My question here is that suppose so I assume what you're saying is true, that there is a higher scrutiny on just meeting the benchmark, right? There's a higher scrutiny, and I assume that the managers are not seen to be competent at that case. So if that is the situation, then even the Dark Triad managers have an incentive to beat the earnings by a margin, to appear competent, to fulfill their need of being seen as a superior manager. So that's kind of it's not. I mean, they probably also have another incentive. Might not be the same incentive as the people in the low Dark Triad, but they also have an incentive to beat the earnings by a margin. I mean, it might be a different incentive, but they still have the incentive. So that's kind of what I was trying to. I mean, that's I think something that you can look at in further in another study, or just explain in the paper.
Yeah, I suppose. So what I'm getting from what you're saying, I think about this more for narcissists, where a narcissist wants to win, wants to be number one,
Yes,
wants to excel.
Yeah.
So that's not. So you're right. It would have to be a different study, and that's not really modeled here. There's no. They're not ranked against each other. So that would be a non-pecuniary. That would be a non-financial incentive that we don't capture or instantiate here. And so that would be a separate study, and I think is interesting. And I have looked at unpublished work. We've looked at that, and certainly I think if you looked at narcissism alone, that might be a prediction.
Yeah.
Again, here that doesn't come into play though. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's great.
So I just have one more comment.
Eva,
this
go ahead.
is Heba.
Heba.
I agree with the earlier points. I think it is a generalizability concern in your setting.
Okay.
I mean, it is about generalizability, because in practice, probably there will be some incentives to meeting expectations or benchmarks anyway for anyone, any top manager. But maybe in your setting, there is no financial incentive, right?
To do what? To beat?
To meet the benchmark.
Yeah, there is a financial incentive, so it's in their best interest to meet expectations. If it's in their best interest to report truthfully if their earnings meet expectations.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, we do need to get to that. Okay, great. So, let's just go there. Let me briefly, and Timothy can jump in and help me with this if he wants, there being at Chapman. But I thought it might be useful if some people are unfamiliar with the particular method that we're using. I just have 2 slides on this. So I promise that the next slide is we're going to get into the game and we'll see the incentives. I think that's where a lot of the questions are coming from. So, but I did want to talk about this method. So we're using an experimental economics method or an abstract method. And so, how do we test this? So if we just kind of back up and say, well, we're interested in this question. We want to know how managers report relative to the expectations of analysts when they have this pressure to beat expectations. So again, we're looking at managers. And so we could try and get this question archivally. We could look at the archival literature, but there's a couple problems with this. First, it's not easy, and some might even say it's impossible to measure true earnings. So we're interested in managers who their earnings truly meet expectations. That's where we're living. That's what we're interested in. That's what we care about. And then their decision after that. And so there are proxies in the archival literature for trying to get at what true earnings were before any potential for management, for earnings management. But Devin earlier mentioned, there's a lot of things. Well, one thing he mentioned is goes into this, and that's a second lever that's managing expectations of analysts down. And so there's many things that go into here. So it's hard to get a clear measure of what true earnings are archivally. And because of all these other levels, the causality is difficult. So that moves us then to an experiment, right? Because in an experiment, we can know what true earnings are. And there's a couple different options, at least in the accounting literature, on what experiment you might do. Now, the majority probably of the traditional experiment in accounting is more of a psychology-based or a JDM or judgment decision-making study. And here you would ask a manager, you provide them a hypothetical scenario and ask them what they would report, So we see this a lot in the audit literature in accounting, where you have an auditor and you provide them a hypothetical scenario and say, okay, what is your audit judgment in this case? And that could work here. Again, the problem is it's with a JDM type experiment, it's difficult to get managers. It's hard to find someone with experience reporting earnings. And it's hard to get them into your lab or via Zoom to do an experiment. And so we run into that issue. Now we could ask students, but I think that's problematic. That might hurt our validity in that a student doesn't know what managers think about when they decide how to report. And so we kind of need managers to make this work, given the hypothetical scenario that we're going to provide them, and they're hard to come by. And so, of course, we want our study to be valid and we want it to be real. And so we run into the problem of not being able to find a manager to do this. And so our solution to this was then to use an experimental economics setting. So here we can take the key financial incentives that exist, and I'll show those next, and we can create a microeconomic world in the lab. So we can create this, again, as long as we capture the correct incentives and capture the correct institutional setting and put that in the lab, we can make it real to the student. And then we have the participant that's going to participate in the study, and have that be a real setting to them and have it be a valid experiment. So experimental economics has a long history. Again, Tim there, he works with in the same school as Vernon Smith, who was one of the pioneers of this method back in the 60s and won a Nobel Prize for it. The idea, and we see the use of this throughout accounting. It's very useful when there's financial incentives that exist, when we have economic theory that we can then bring into the lab as a way to control what's happening in the lab and to run a study. In this setting, then we have clear incentives, this last bullet point, that I've described and that we'll show next, that matter. They have to be salient to participants. And again, our goal is to create this in the lab to make it real to participants. And so what we then use that theory to generalize to the real world. So it's important then that we make sure that that it's clear what matters to the students. It's clear how incentives affect the participants in the study. And as a result, it's useful to actually have participants without experience. Remember, we can't get managers. We can't really get people to do this study that have experience reporting earnings. That's going to be quite hard. And so as a result, what we do instead is bring students in, and we don't use context. So we don't create a hypothetical scenario. Rather, we create a real scenario in the lab using incentives. And we don't mention reporting, and we don't call them managers. Again, we have the financial incentives that apply from the real world, and we make it real in that way to participants. And then again, we use theory to generalize to the real world. So that's what we do. We have an abstract experiment without contextual labels, using students, modeling the incentives we believe exist in our setting of interest. So we need to instantiate this skepticism. We need to create this, and we do that with an extensive forum game. And I won't make you go through this, but you can just quickly see there's 3 steps here. At the top, nature chooses what true earnings are. Earnings can beat, meet, or miss. Second, the blue there is management's choice to report. They're going to report truthfully or untruthfully. We'll see that in the next slide. And then finally, investors choose whether to accept that report, to believe that report, or not. So it's probably easier to see this way. And I'll try and walk through this step by step.
Sorry,
But Scott, go ahead.
Can I ask a question? Yeah, before you actually start explaining the game. So so do you have anything in the data, or do you look at this association between the dark triads and the use of social media? Because
the use of social media, Anil, is that what you said?
yeah, because I mean, your construct of public scrutiny mainly stems from social media. So I was wondering, I mean, managers can actually refrain from using social media as one of the mechanisms to not to sort of get into, any kind of bad mouthing, or, I mean, there are always CEOs who are very active, but there are also those who are actually like they hold back not to be very active because then it leads to other problems. So I was thinking, is there like anything in the literature, or do you know if there is an association between dark triads and use of social media? That was the thought.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I don't know the answer. I think there could be research out there about that. I'm not sure. For our study, the way we operationalize this, that wouldn't come into play. I talked about social media as one reason we're interested in public scrutiny, because we think that's one way that scrutiny has increased for managers. The way we operationalize this in the experiment, it's not needed, so we don't model that directly. We'll show you just a second how we operationalize public scrutiny. So I think that's something interesting as we look at how this might generalize to the natural setting, right? If you have a manager who avoids public scrutiny altogether somehow by either not using social media or being in a type of industry where they're less, I showed the high tech industry earlier, right? But other industries are less scrutinized, and so this would probably have less of an effect. And so yeah, that's a good, interesting point as far as generalizability. So our results would be more likely to have an effect where public scrutiny is high. Yeah.
Yeah, just a small bit maybe. So it's like, some learning effect there. So in the sense that if it happens, then the managers might choose not to go that path, because despite of reporting honestly, if they are scrutinized, then they might actually reduce the use of social media, and then thereby, sort of get away with this also being honest, but not really play this game, but sort of reduce the use of media, that consumption of social media. That was just an additional piece that came to my mind, and maybe if you can also bring this up in the paper somewhere.
Yeah, no, we can think about that for sure.
Yeah.
Certainly, like I was saying, it's like an athlete who's being criticized, and they just turn off their Twitter. They quit looking at their phone. And so that might reduce the amount of scrutiny that they feel and might affect. It's an interesting issue that we might talk about here in the paper as far as how our results might generalize. Thanks a lot. Yeah, very good. Okay, so here we have the three settings, right? So nature chooses first. That's at the top, where we have beat. And so what I put two labels here. So again, we don't use context, so we don't use contextual labels, or we don't use mundane realism. And so participants see that, there's a 37.5% chance of middle, a 25% chance of middle, and a 37.5% chance of down. And for our purposes, I'll call it beat, meet, and miss. So you have all three of those settings, where middle is the least likely, which we think is, how it is in the real world. And then we have in the blue on the left of each of these three grids, you have the choices that managers can make, right? So if you go to the far right and managers and true earnings miss, they can either report the truth, they can report miss, which is that bottom line on the far right, or they can report meet, the middle one. They can't report two steps above, so they can't report beat. And we did that just to make things simpler, to make solving the game simpler, and to reduce noise in the study. If we go to the far left and true earnings beat expectations, then they can report truthfully as beat, or they can misreport down and say met, which is dumb, but sometimes participants do dumb things. Anyway, they can do that if they want. If they report meet, they have three choices. They can report truthfully for meet, they're in the middle. They can report beat and they can report miss. And so Tim, I'm Sebastian, let me just go ahead and show this and just pipe up, Tim, if we don't get you answered. Okay, so so these then are the incentives for managers, if you're unfamiliar with kind of the setup, right? So if they, and it's not the full, but I'll go step by step. So for example, if they're on the far right where my head is, and they, right here, and they true earnings miss, it's in their best interest to misreport, right? They get 40 rather than 20 if they lie, if they say they actually met instead of missed. And again, our goal here is to instantiate, is to create this setting that we talked about earlier. Again, going over to the far left, if they beat, they should tell the truth. They should say that they beat, and they'll get 50 rather than 40 if it's accepted. And then in the middle, and this is important, in the middle here, if true earnings meet, it's in their best interest to report truthfully. So they get 50 versus 10 if they say miss, and instead of 40 if they say beat. So again, they get 50 right there in the middle of everything. They should report truthfully. So it's in their financial best interest to report truthfully. We next talk about so investors then have two choices. They can accept or reject. They're on the top. They're the green investors. And so I just show you here, these are still only the blue, which is only managers payoffs. Again, it's in their best interest if they beat to report truthfully, if they miss to report, if they meet to report truthfully, and if they miss to lie and to say that they beat. What are investors' incentives? Investors would like to accept if they would like to accept if they should accept. So they want to accept truthful reports. So again, on the far left, they get 50 versus 30. Again, look at the green color. They get 50 versus 30 if they accept a true report. So if managers report truthfully and they accept that, they get 50. Again, on the far right over there by my head, okay, they should only accept if participants say miss. They get 50 versus 30. And in the middle, again, they should accept only if the truth is reported by managers. So if meet is said, they should accept. They also have this outside option where they can just reject and they get 40 no matter what. Okay, if they're worried about not being able to identify a correct report. And so then here's our Nash equilibrium, where again, in equilibrium, we would expect managers, if they miss over here, if they miss, they should report meet and they should not be believed. Okay, and this is important because that then creates this skepticism. So that skepticism leads then over in the meet. The financial incentives are such that they should say meet, managers should report truthfully, but they should not be believed. However, that's still in their financial interest to say meet. You can see the Nash equilibrium at 40-40. But again, they're not going to be believed. So there is now a non-pecuniary, a non-financial incentive to over-report. They might want to lie to not be seen as a liar, even though it's not in their financial best interest. Finally, in equilibrium, if they beat, they should report beat and they should be believed. Timothy, did we get to your question there? Anything
I think so. I think so. So what's going on is the utility from being seen genuinely as a high type is coming from non-pecuniary reasons, and that's why the triad would drive it. I'm actually amazed your subjects understood that game tree, because I had to write it down because to figure it all out. I'm surprised you could even fit it on a slide, for that matter. Question about this though. I understand by looking at each either 2x2 or 2x3 individually, how this is the equilibrium, and you've solved the equilibrium assuming the probability on top, right? In that, right. I don't know if its middle is coming from each of these, so my best response is a function of that p vector and the payoff vector.
Yeah, and Sebastian can jump in here. This is his work. So the appendix walks through how we solve that, Timothy. So happy to send that over to you.
Okay, thank you.
okay, and we answered your, okay, good. Yeah. And so here's the grid. Participants receive this. I mean, I do want to address that issue of, these experiments are fun to run. They're time consuming and they take a lot of effort, as Timothy knows, and it's important to help participants understand what's going on. So here's kind of the layout. Here's the setup. Here's what we did. So first we had the participants come in and before they came in, rather, they took the survey. They went through the Dark Triad. We then, as they come into the lab, the second, if you follow the blue arrows, that second box, we randomly assign them a type. But again, participants all see all the instructions. And this is, again, very common that we're going to follow a script. We're going to read it out loud. And we're going to have participants follow along. And then that third bullet, the third square there, the third rectangle, we're going to ask them comprehension questions throughout. So we'll pause after each major point and ask them a question to help them understand. Again, they also have a grid like this with them the whole time, so they can refer to it as needed. So that's all the training. The training takes about half an hour, sometimes a little bit more. So we really want to help them understand what's going on. Then as we get to the kind of these lighter red or pink squares, this happens 10 times. So this is each period. So first, it is a sequential game. So first, the manager observes earnings. Second, we have our public scrutiny manipulation, and I'll show that next. The manager then chooses what to report within the scenario we talked about before, meet, beat, or miss. We then ask them whether they think their report will be accepted. Finally, the investor makes their choice and they choose whether to accept or not. We do that 10 times, and there's a post-experimental questionnaire. The Dark Triad is measured. It's a short form measurement. It's commonly used in the literature. That happens before they come. Then, so if you look kind of down to the bottom left here, here's our public scrutiny manipulation. So we manipulate this between subjects. So participants either simply report, or they must, in the high public scrutiny, they have to sequentially show their number. So on participant screens, we say investor number 5, for example, or manager number 5 is reporting. They show that number and everyone looks at them. We ran this 2 ways. We ran it in the lab, and then we, during COVID, needed to gather additional data. And so we ran the exact same study over Zoom. We used Z-Tree in the lab. We used O-Tree via Zoom. Participants in the lab stood up. So they were seen by everyone. They held up their number. So number 5, if I'm the manager, they sat down. The next one stood up. They sat down. The next one sat up. They sat down. Via Zoom, everyone's camera was on the whole time, and they showed their number, and they held it there for about 10 seconds. So that was our manipulation for public scrutiny. So it's a compound manipulation. 1, the investor knows what manager they're paired with, and 2, everyone sees the manager. So that's our manipulation for public scrutiny. Any questions on that? So that's the setup and the design.
I have a question. For the repeated interaction, is it with rematching, or they interacted the same pair every round?
Yeah. So great, Heba, thanks. They rematched, and so there was no ability for them to form reputations. Yeah.
So the public scrutiny in your manipulation is just coming, let's say, from social pressure or the concern of not being seen as honest. But in practice, like, there are more consequences, like, for example, bad reputation, bad social media coverage. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we're very stark here, right? It's exactly right. We want to act away from all of that, from reputation itself. And so we don't have those other factors. The ones that you just mentioned are controlled for. And so we can try and get directly at our manipulation public scrutiny.
So I have just one last question. Is there a difference between the in-lab versus online? Like, did you observe a difference in behavior across the 2 data collection methods?
Yeah, no, we combine the results. Results. Yeah.
And there was no like significant difference in the DVs that you measured across the two methods, right? like Zoom versus in lab.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know if anyone's interested in this, and just real quick, but it was, you know, we run this whole study, right? So we're only interested in meat, but we wanted to operationalize the whole setting. And so the whole decision space is available. And we wanted to do that to be consistent with the natural setting we're interested in. We didn't want to have to use deception. And so, you know, meeting earnings is a relatively low, true earnings meeting expectations is a fairly low occurrence. It is a fairly unexpected occurrence. It doesn't happen that often. And so we wanted to try and operationalize that whole setting and not be deceptive about it. So the reason we had to run a second study is, again, we're only interested in that meat. And so we needed more data. It doesn't occur that often. And so, and so we, you know, it was COVID by the time we were able to do that. And it was interesting doing a Zoom experiment. It wasn't perfect and there were challenges to it, but I think it was, for our case, it was a good use because, you know, I think it's public scrutiny is high when your camera's on it. You know, as we've taught students via Zoom, they often turn their cameras off, and we often want them to turn their cameras on. And so I think that helped us. And so the manipulation of public scrutiny remains strong and consistent with being able to do it on Zoom. I think it's easier to do in the lab. But again, if I had to do it again, I would do it. I would use Zoom probably in any study I do online, if there's any type of interaction, just because it's you have to have people pay attention. I think having a camera on helps that quite a bit. So yeah. Anyway, long answer, but no, we didn't notice.
Thank you so much, Jess.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think someone else had a question.
Who?
Yeah, may I speak?
Oh yeah.
So, yeah, you mentioned there's you didn't want any reputation effects, but it's not clear to me. I don't think the true state was ever revealed to the investors, right?
It was not. Yeah.
Okay. So, and the second, in the public scrutiny, all the investors could see the manager making the report. So, how exactly is reputation formed or not formed in your setting?
Yep. So there's no reputation, right? Yeah. So we control for that. We don't allow reputation since they're changing participants each time. Yeah. So
right, but like kind of like the investor who's paired with that particular manager has the same information as the other investors, even though the investors are not impacted by the manager's decision. Is it correct?
Yeah.
Because like
so
the
you
truth
know,
was never revealed, and
right.
everybody sees that manager making a report.
Well, no. So they don't see the report that's made. So let me be clear. So they in the high scrutiny setting, I show my number, and everyone sees that, and it's a view, and they see who stands up or who's holding their number up. But then again, it is still a sequential 2-by-2 game. And so only the investor sees what that manager actually reports.
Okay, yeah, so it's not the true state, but also the managers either meet or fail to meet is private to the investor. Okay, I was just
Correct.
confused about that.
Yeah, that's right.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yep. No, thanks for your question.
Do they find their payout? Do they receive feedback on their payouts after every round?
They do not. Yeah. So there's no history.
Okay.
We abstract away from that as well.
Okay, now I understand. Before I was really baffled. How could you not know if they lied or not? Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I mean, yeah. So that's what we did. And again, the idea is to really isolate the effect and to abstract away from even history. Yeah. Thanks for that clarification. Yeah, I appreciate these questions, helping everyone, I'm sure. John?
Yeah, I just have a very quick clarification question. Could you go back to your payoff function, the payoff metrics?
Love to, sure.
Yeah, just in the middle graph. So why manager's payoff is flipped around the middle cases is 50 versus 40.
So So we incent managers to have their report accepted. And so you're talking about the blue 50 minus 50 versus 40, correct? Right there in the middle. Yeah, I can't. The way when I have my face on here, you can't see my mouse. So I think everyone knows, hopefully. So we're talking about the meet, when earnings truly meet and the manager reports meet, the blue is either 50 or 40. And so yeah, that incentive, that reduction is the penalty manager gets for not being believed. So so there's a does that make sense? I mean, they want investors to believe them. Yeah, so that's why we do that.
So basically, you install an incentive for people to just meet versus beat, because I was thinking like intuitively it should be higher payoff from beat versus meet.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm sorry. So you're talking about the meet versus beat. So that 40. Again, I need to. So if accepted, right, managers can get 40, 50, or 10. Is that what you're talking about? The 40 versus that 40? Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. Great, yeah. So hopefully everyone's, again, without me showing it, so now the investor has chosen accept, the true earnings are meet, and the manager can choose beat, meet, or miss. And so here, we do this for a couple of reasons. But the main reason is we want there to be no financial incentive for misreporting in meet, because we're trying to measure a non-pecuniary incentive. We're trying to measure this incentive of misreporting so that they can be seen as being truthful, right? We want to see whether public scrutiny will cause them to lie, even though it's not in their financial best interest. So that's why the 40 is below the 50. So it's not in their financial interest to misreport if true earnings meet.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for that clarification.
Yeah, no, that's important, right? We did that on purpose. So that was purposeful. So I thank you for clarifying. All right, very good. So yeah, so what do we find? So I'll walk through these, and I'm going to just walk through the figures, and instead of the tables for ease of exposition here. So we find, as we'd expect, let's just start on the blue line on the left. So participants have an incentive, managers have an incentive to misreport when true earnings miss, and they do. Now they don't do as much as this is not 100%, it's only 82%. But I think we find over the course of many different experiments, participants don't always follow their, frankly, they never or very rarely follow their financial incentives exactly. But they do generally follow their incentives here. And if true earnings miss, they report meet. So they misreport over there 82% of the time on the left. And again, as you can see, this is measuring the frequency of earnings management. All the way on the right, we see here that managers, when their true earnings beat, they report truthfully as they should, again, following their financial incentives. But what we care about is the middle. And our whole study is looking at this interesting thing that we predict will happen when true earnings meet expectations exactly. And so we do see some evidence of misreporting, 8%. Now, again, what we're interested in is how public scrutiny affects that middle bar, that pink striped bar, and how low dark triad affects that. So we're looking basically at a three-way interaction. So let me break it out now into low dark triads and low dark triads and high dark triad managers. We look at this a couple ways. What's in the paper is we split at the median, but we can also leave this measure of dark triad continuous. We show then between the blue and the pink stripes, the blue is low public scrutiny, the pink is high public scrutiny. And again, we have it broken out by miss, meet, and beat. So let's go over to the right here. Let's go over up here to the high dark triad. And we, again, as we predict here, no effect. We expect the hard dark triad just to follow their financial incentives because they don't care. In the case of meat, if others think they're lying, they're just going to follow their incentives. And we get that effect. And so we find that these differences between low public scrutiny and high public scrutiny are not significant. If they miss, they misreport. If they meet, they generally report meet. And if they beat, they report beat. The low dark triad is where we're interested, particularly in the middle. So if we start on the far left, when they miss, they report as following their financial incentives by misreporting. On the right of the left, if they beat, the 1% and the 5% are the same. And then we look at the meet, and we do see finally in this, for the low dark triad managers, when true earnings meet, we show and find a significant difference between low public scrutiny and high public scrutiny, that difference between the 3% and the 10%. See you, Alyssa. Have a good day. It's good to see you. All right, so let's measure this then, and let's bring some statistics into it here so we can get some measurements. And so what we do to do this is we're going to combine the miss and the meet together. So we're going to take the beat and the miss and combine them into not meet, and we'll keep the meet right here. We'll keep that as meet. So that's what I've done in this next graph. Here we have meet and not meet. So again, the not meet is the beat and the miss, right? Combined into one. And so, 50% of the time they're telling the truth, 50% of the time they're not. So that's following their financial incentives. Again, we combine beat and we combine miss. When they miss, they're lying. When they're beat, they're reporting truthfully. But H1 predicts that we will see, in effect, we will see that when public scrutiny is high, participants that meet will misreport. And that's what we're looking at on the left here. So we look at a full three-way interaction, but we're just here looking at the two-way interaction that's up top. So we find a significant, at least marginal one-tailed or significant one-tailed p-value of 0.04 for this interaction of meeting versus public scrutiny. And again, what we're interested in is the simple effect over here on the left, the 6% versus the 10%, that when public scrutiny is high and true earnings meet expectations, we see a significant difference in an increase in misreporting, 10% greater than 6%. And then again, though, what we're interested in is the full three-way interaction. We want to see how this, we expect this to be exacerbated in a stronger effect when dark triad is low, when manager participants are low on dark triad. And so again, starting with the high dark triad, starting right here on the right, we see no significant simple effects. So public scrutiny has no effect when dark triad is high. However, when it's low, we do see the 10% versus the 3%. And that simple effect, that 10% versus the 3% is our predicted effect. So we look at this in a couple different ways in the paper. The black here, the black text that just came on the screen is for the full three-way interaction. Here again, we're interacting meet versus not meet, low versus high dark triad, and public scrutiny versus no public scrutiny. And in that three-way interaction, we find a marginally significant three-way interaction. And then we also run it, the red right below that at the top, table 3, is a two-way interaction where we're looking only at dark triad managers. And there, the two-way interaction for just low dark triad managers is meet versus not meet and public scrutiny. And that's a significant one-tailed p-value. So again, what we're most curious about and most interested in testing is that 10% minus the 3%. And the black indicates that simple effect in the three-way interaction. And if we look at just the low dark triad managers, we get the red, which is also significant. And so that's consistent with H1 and H2. Questions on that?
Jessen.
Hey, Bright, good to see you again.
Yep. I'm wondering, do you differentiate the types of misreporting? Beat, like whether they reported when they are meeting, whether they reported higher than the actual versus lower than the actual. Because I was thinking if you underreport, maybe that sends a strong signal that I'm more honest.
So we combine them all together. And we use that argument that it makes the most sense to overreport But yeah, so you're trying to say, Bright, that they might have actually met expectations and lied and said they missed.
Right.
Just so it's very clear that they're being honest. Yeah.
Right. It's like not in their best interest. This is the worst outcome for them.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious.
Yeah. No, we combine all types of misreporting together, so that the 10%, you know, is both beating and missing. Now, most of the time, and I think we have statistics for this in the paper, and if Sebastian can find it quicker than I can, go ahead. But yeah, some of those are reporting down, where they meet but they report miss. Now, for me, it's hard to tell whether they just, you know, sometimes if you've ever run any kind of experiment in the lab, you know that despite all your best efforts, sometimes participants do dumb things. but it's also, and we make this argument in the paper as well, I believe, that, you know, it actually is, like you're saying, and I appreciate that, it's a stronger, an even stronger signal, kind of a crazy signal to report miss if you met. So yeah, that's in there. Does that answer your question? That 10% includes those guys. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it will be interesting to see if most of the misreported people who misreport are actually underreport, are reporting a miss. But this is really interesting.
Yeah, no, that's not the majority. That's not the majority. It's a small minority, and most of them are, when they misreport, most of the time they're over-reporting. So they're saying that they beat even though they truly just met.
Okay.
There are some of those, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, cool question, thanks.
But even underreporting is consistent with the idea that I want to be seen as honest, but I can't prove it. So I can see the argument for combining them.
Thanks. That's yeah. We try to make that argument, and it's good. I appreciate the feedback that at least the two of you think we're not crazy by doing that.
That's why we work together.
It must be. It must be. Yeah, we enjoyed Bright presenting a paper just Friday, right, at the University of Illinois. So it was great to have you both represented here. All right, so those are the main effects. I can show one other. I actually would appreciate, let me skip ahead. Sorry, close your eyes if you get seasick here. I want to go to table. Table 4. So then I'm gonna have to move my head. So this is, we talk about this in the paper. It plays a pretty minor role, but what I want you to focus on, the question here that we ask, this is a question for managers. And each time after they report, we ask, what's the likelihood that your report will be accepted? Now, we don't say it that way, right? Because we don't use contextual labels. So we ask, what chance do you give that participants will pick left? Which again, as I'm talking about it with you, means that it's accepted. So these means then up here are, again, the chance that the report, the chance that the manager thinks, the probability they're giving that their report will be accepted. And so what I'd like to look at is a 68%. And so here, so we have a significant interaction here between meeting and public scrutiny, such that basically this simple effect here, for those that meet expectations exactly, they have, this is significant. The 68% is higher significantly than the 57%. You can see that here. So the effect of public scrutiny, you can see it down at the bottom. The effect of public scrutiny given meet, that first simple effect in panel C, is significant one-tailed. And so at the end of the day, what this shows then is that managers, those whose earnings exactly meet, they expect that their report will be accepted under high public scrutiny, but they don't under low public scrutiny. And so what we're trying to show is a little bit of process evidence here, or at least a little bit of consistent evidence that they're misreporting under public scrutiny when earnings meet, because they think by doing so, they'll be more likely to be accepted. They'll be more likely to be believed. And so that's our table 4. And then finally, we have results for investor acceptance. And so here, this is just what if public scrutiny and if the state of the world, or if reporting, meeting or not meeting, rather affects whether or not participants will accept the report. So again, that whether investors will accept that report. And we find no significant effects here other than meet versus not meet. So as we would expect, there is a main effect that when managers report meet, that they're less likely to be accepted. So that's the top row, the 31, the 0.31, and the 0.33 are significantly lower than the 0.74 and the 0.71. So again, as we expect, investors, when they see a meet report, are skeptical of it, and that's consistent with what we were trying to operationalize ahead of time. Okay, so
just a question on the logistics.
Yeah.
So those were all just for managers that had a certain state of nature?
Which one? Sorry.
So the two regressions we went through before, maybe let's just go back to the very first one. Sorry,
way back.
No, there's one or two slides ago.
The picture, Tim, or that table 4?
The table, the logistic, repeated measures logistic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so this is the observations are managers that got the middle signal, and then you're regressing what they think if it'll be met or not met. Is your 0, 1? Or is this for managers, regardless of what signal they got, they're answering this question?
Yeah, these are across all signals. But only, I believe this is only for Dark Triad. Sebastian, you need to double check me here though.
This is for the non-Dark Triad, the low Dark Triad managers. Yeah.
But across all
the one where we should see a difference. Okay. So why in the regression aren't we controlling for the state of nature? Wouldn't it be that, if I got a low state of nature, I'd have a different expectation of if it would be accepted or not, if rather than having a high? Or is this conditional on report or conditional on state of nature? That's my question.
Yeah, so report is what we have here, the meet or the not meet. I think if I'm answering your question right, Timothy, if I'm understanding your question correctly. And so what we want to show here is when they meet expectations, and we've when they report meet, rather, sorry, it's not the state of nature, but it's what they report. So that's the left-hand side. This is the meet, not meet. When they report meet, they expect that report to be believed by investors significantly. So only when they have high public scrutiny. So
okay,
generally,
so the not meet are two state of natures. That's what's going on here. That's why you could call this a binary. Right. I guess why wouldn't you just run it for all the different states of nature?
Yeah.
Shouldn't you get stronger results then?
Yeah, we've done that, and you're gonna tax my memory. We'll see if Sebastian can remember. We've looked. That's something we could look at again. We've had that before. I think in a prior version.
I mean, I understand as accountants, your audience does get confused if everything's not binary, but it seems like you might actually have more power because I would expect very different reactions for not meet when the state of nature was high versus not meet when the state of nature was low.
And we had that analysis in fact, I mean, this is very astute, and we appreciate it. We had that, we did condition by state of nature, and that has been in the paper, right? So didn't we do that last time, Sebastian? we had it by state of nature, and so we've moved away from that. We'd have to go back and remember why. But we'll revisit. That's a great suggestion, and I'll have to remind ourselves why we moved away from that. And we have looked at that in the past, so that's useful. Thank you. And Sebastian didn't say anything, so I must not have said anything wrong there.
No, I completely agreed.
Yeah, we'll look at that.
Sebastian approves.
I appreciate having a co-author with better memory than me. That's good. Okay, so overall, we find, as we expect, that participants do misreport when public scrutiny is high, and they're less concerned about investors when they're more concerned, as low Dark Triad, when they're more concerned about how investors view them when their earnings exactly meet expectations. So we do see this non-pecuniary incentive to lie, to not be seen as a liar. We think this has implications for what we've seen in the archival literature as a change in the reporting game. Again, the idea that investors are more skeptical of earnings that just meet, reports rather, of earnings that just meet expectations exactly, or just beat expectation by a little bit. We think then we've discussed a kind of a hidden incentive, a hidden non-pecuniary incentive that could be of interest. This and the second bullet point here, we believe we contribute by showing a natural control, that is, managers who care about how others view them, that should be helpful at preventing misstatement. We see that becoming, rather flipping around, being a misreporting stimulant, where conscientious managers now may misreport to appear truthful. By virtue of caring about others seeing them truthfully, they may actually misreport. Third, public scrutiny has implications for managers. We think that's interesting variables. You guys have given us some great suggestions of things to look at related to social media. And that's, of course, just one different interesting implication of and cause of public scrutiny. But we appreciate those suggestions. And we think that's an interesting angle here, the idea that managers are increasingly scrutinized and the potential interesting and perhaps unpredicted effects that might cause.
Jessen,
yeah.
May I have just one quick comment?
So
in managerial accounting, we also look at misreporting, but internal misreporting. Let's say, for example, for budget misreporting and these kinds of other disruptive behavior. So I wonder, I know that you're positioning it more as a financial accounting story, but I think it as well can apply inside organizations, like for internal misreporting and public scrutiny. Even your manipulation of scrutiny could be more applicable inside organizations than outside, because in outside there are some reputation concerns and other considerations, but inside maybe it's just that you're being observed by others, like your supervisors, for example.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think the public scrutiny variable would be super relevant in an internal reporting setting. I guess where you could help me is thinking about, the state of nature here, right? So the reporting environment.
Yeah, because in any reporting, like if you assume the manager has some uncertainty about his or her operations, they could have some good states and some bad states, and then they have to report their performance. So it is, I think, equally or relatively applicable inside organizations, because anyone who performs will suffer some idiosyncratic risk and some uncertainty in translating effort to performance or outcome, and then they have to report to get funding or whatever.
No, that's really great, and I really appreciate that. And I think we've shied away from that. We don't want to overclaim. We think, at least the way we envisioned it also is a financial setting. But I'm going to try and see if we can work that in as a potential motivation, and with your encouragement. And so I appreciate that suggestion. Thank you very much.
Okay, a great design. Yeah, I really liked your design. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. All right, very good. I appreciate that. So, and then we have a pretty decent literature now on dark triad managers within the accounting literature even, and we generally I think we've shown the negative effects of high dark triad, with some exceptions, but we see problems with managers being Machiavellian or narcissists. We discover a setting where actually low dark triad, where a manager who is more concerned about how others view them could pose a potential problem. So we see that as an interesting contribution as well. Other questions or thoughts? This has been super helpful, and I really appreciate the comments that we've gotten so far. And I know there's some in chat that Sebastian's been following. So is there anything else?
Thank you very much, dear Professor Jessen, for your contribution and your effort. It's really an excellent presentation. Thank you very much. If anyone have any questions, you can open your mic and ask your question.
Yeah.
Yes.
I didn't have a question, but I had I'll send you the link to this paper if I can find it. There was a whole paradigm of studies in economics once where people rolled die.
Yeah.
Then they saw the die, no one else, and you report, and you get higher for reporting 6 than 1, for instance. They duplicated this study with a nuns and an abbot, and the distribution shift to the left, so you have over-reporting of 1, 2s, and 3s. And this is like exactly what your claim is. Like, in order to be seen as honest, I'm actually going to lie.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. Yeah, thank you. That'd be awesome.
I'll try to find it and send it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. I have not seen those at all.
Jessen.
Yeah.
I'm trying to wrap my head around. I understand you built this game to to make it so that the economic incentive is not the main driver. So I guess what they're going for is, some people want to have their kind of in report be accepted by the investor. That meant a lot to them. Why did you decide to take, I guess, because the state of nature is randomly assigned, so it doesn't speak about the manager's ability at all, right? How might that motivation factor into the story if you were, if you were to consider it?
So again, rephrase that one more time for me. Sorry.
So so basically you cannot get more money from misreporting.
Yeah.
But I think
if
you
you
can
meet.
get more satisfaction from being accepted. Okay, so that's taps into some motivation. But I assume a large chunk of the managers also kind of see being able to meet or beat expectations being kind of an signal about their competence, right? But obviously there's nothing they can do to change the states of nature in your game.
Right.
I'm just thinking, I assume that to be a large subset of the managers out there. Why did you decide not to go in that direction? Or like, if you were to decide to go in that direction, how might the game change?
So again, the setting, so we have to create a setting where they've done all they can. So they've some real task, right? Where they've done all they can. And the result of their real task is that we get these 3 states of nature. They either beat, meet, or miss, right? And so then how does that fact that they've done this real task ahead of time, as and that's what happens in the real world. Managers obviously have some input into how successful the company is. How would that then affect our results? Is that right? Yeah. Our choice was obviously to abstract away from that, to control for that, so that we can focus on our variables of interest. If I guess, I mean, I don't know, and it's an empirical question. My sense is it would potentially exacerbate the effect, because then the manager feels more ownership in the results, and so it's even more salient to them that this reflects on them. So again, if I've truly met, and I met, I really did, I did the task. So it's not just the experimenter giving me, these incentives and giving me this state of the world outcome, nature giving this state of the world. It's rather that I created this. And so I think in that sense, at least my first thought, it would increase the effect, because the manager, the results that the manager has are because of their choices. And so they feel more personally invested in them. Yeah. Thanks for that question.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Ryan, what'd you have, Ryan?
Yeah,
oh, what? You had something there? Or go ahead, Mohammed. Sorry.
If you're not, Ryan?
Yeah, Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me? Sorry. I was just saying, if you did want to build up the underreporting angle at all, which it seems like it's not a huge part of your, there wasn't a very large number of participants, but there are some papers that have shown that nuns will misreport to be perceived as honest. And I was just looking it up and found another paper that replicates that with a larger scale, not with nuns, but with a different group who might appear to want to be honest. So if you
Timothy
wanted to
mentioned
build
this
it
as
up, I
well.
have a couple slides.
Yeah,
Yes,
Timothy
I
mentioned this
can
as
just-
well. Yeah,
Okay, that's it.
that's
Good
awesome.
luck.
Yeah,
Interesting paper, though.
yeah, we didn't focus a lot on that. I was concerned others might. Yeah, I worried that others would kind of not go along with our reasoning, and the reasoning that you guys also gave us that makes sense, that they're hurting themselves even more to be seen as honest. We put that in the paper, but yeah, this would be great stuff to bolster that. So we really appreciate that. Thanks, Ryan.
Are there another question? If anyone have any questions, you can open your mic and ask your question.
Thanks, Anish.
Thank you very much, dear Professor Jessen, for your contribution and your effort. Thank you very much, and it's all that remains for me is to say is thank you everyone that joined us, and I thank you very much for taking the time out to present to us today. The Professor Jessen is being really appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much, and I hope to see you soon in Egypt, dear Prof.
Yes, thank you so much.
You are very, very welcome.